So let's start to make a list. Save that for later by Grandma. And let's talk about arteries, shall we? Just like this. Arteries. Sweet. So which direction do arteries transport blood? Totally. So arteries transport blood away from the heart. So the way that you can remember that is that it's artery away. Right? You will hear people talk about oxygen concentration. That has nothing to do with the definition of arteries. Now, most arteries do carry oxygen-rich blood, but that is not how we define arteries. Okay? The exception to that, of course, is the pulmonary artery above the heart. Thank you, Mr. Silas. That carries oxygen-poor blood. But you will hear people say, oh, arteries carry oxygen-rich blood. And you're like, not always. Most of the time, but not always. Okay. Now, they have very, very thick muscular walls. And there's a reason why. Because the pressure, the blood pressure in the artery is extremely high. So, you guys have all watched horror movies, yes? Somebody gets their arm chopped off, or somebody gets a cut in the neck, and blood starts spraying out, yes? Yep, that's called arterial spray, okay? If you have a tube here, your trachea is right here. This is the tube to your lungs. And then on each side of your trachea are two arteries about the size of your finger, your index finger. And these two arteries sit right here, and it's called your carotid artery, okay? You can feel it, so go right next to your trachea, only on one side, because if you push both sides, you'll pass out. So push on one side, not both, okay? So if you come right next to your trachea and you push in, you'll feel your heartbeat right there, okay? Those two carotid arteries come out of the top of your aortic arch here. So do you remember how the aortic arch goes across the top of the heart, and out of the top of the arch were those three tubes, right? Well, two of those tubes come up and they lay right here, and those are your carotid arteries. So if you ever cut these, you get arterial spray. It's almost instantly life-threatening. It's really serious, okay? These are also the same arteries. Do any of you watch MMA, mixed martial arts, and they do different chokes and different holds, right? What happens to the person consciously if you cut off the blood here? They pass out, okay? Now, there is a very, very serious discussion about the different holds that law enforcement use, because if you cut off the blood flow, the person can go unconscious. However, if you do it too hard, you'll crack and crush the trachea. You then get bleeding in the trachea. The blood goes into your lungs. The person's blood fills up the lungs, and they drown. Okay, so when you start talking about choke holds and pressure points in the neck, you got to be super careful and be highly, highly trained. And it's a very, very detailed discussion. Okay, there's a lot to that. So super high blood pressure in the arteries, and that's what they show in horror movies. You know, somebody get their arm chopped off, and there's this spray. And Ms. Reyes, when you go and study forensics, you will study blood spatter patterns, and you will be able to tell whether it was a vein that was cut or an artery. You will be able to tell the depth of the cut, the distance that the individual was from the wall, based on whether it is a concentrated spray that hits in big droplets and then runs down the wall, or if it's a venous cut, it's more of a foamy mist. You're going to get into some interesting stuff. Okay, so the reason why the arteries have a high blood pressure is because they have a small diameter. Okay, as you reduce diameter, pressure goes up, and you know this based on a garden hose. You ever used a garden hose that doesn't have a handle on the end and the water is just pouring out slowly? How do you get that water to come out with more force? What do you do to the end of the garden hose?
I put my finger on it.
Right. You put your thumb on it, right? Okay. So if this is the garden hose, you put your thumb on the end of the hose, and what happens to the pressure?
It increases.
It increases. Why? Because what did you do to the diameter, the opening of the hose? You took the diameter and made it
Smaller.
smaller. Okay, so you have the same water volume, but coming out of a smaller area. Okay, if you have the same volume out of a smaller area, the pressure goes up. Okay, so through arteries, you have a very, very high rate of blood flow. Okay, when you cut yourself, almost always what you cut is a vein. All right. If you cut an artery, that's really serious. Don had what should have been an outpatient procedure. Well, this is before M was born. So it was about 22, 23 years ago. They were doing some work on her abdomen. It was supposed to be a 45-minute procedure, in and out, piece of cake. While they were in there, one of the abdominal tools nicked a blood vessel in her abdomen, and they weren't sure if it was a vein or an artery. So Don spent 3 days in the hospital, and they had a test for internal bleeding, and it was really intense. So almost always when you cut yourself, like with a knife, you're cooking food and you nick yourself. That's almost always a vein. Cutting an artery is very, very serious. Okay, but usually you have to cut really deep to get to an artery. It's rare for arteries to be close to the surface. In fact, the only arteries that are close to the surface are your carotid arteries right here. That's why I had you guys touch them. And then, of course, there's no valves. Only veins have valves. Okay, so those are the characteristics of arteries. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use those same characteristics in the same order, except instead of talking about arteries, we're going to simply apply them to veins. And so that you see that just about everything between arteries and veins are opposite. Okay, so since arteries transport blood away from the heart, that means that veins transport blood where?
To the heart.
To the heart. And instead of thick muscular walls, the walls are actually thin.
Thin.
Yep. Well, now these two things should go hand in hand. If they're thin walls, what do you immediately know about the pressure in veins?
Low.
Yeah. Now, I have to be careful saying low blood pressure, because if it gets too low, then you get really sluggish and you pass out. So medical people don't want me to use the term low. So I'm going to use moderate. Okay. It's not high. It is a moderate blood pressure. You have
Mr.
to be
Mann, I have a
careful saying
question.
low. I'm sorry?
I have a question.
Name it.
What does it mean when someone has like low blood pressure or high blood pressure? Like what
Got it. So
is exactly?
high blood pressure can be caused by different characteristics. If I eat too much salt, okay? If I eat too much salt, that turns my body chemistry hypertonic, okay? So that's a disruption in homeostasis. So what my body cells, what my somatic cells will then do is they will retain water to then lower the concentration of the salt and return me to homeostasis. Well, my blood system is a sealed system. So if you push more water into a sealed system, what happens to the pressure? If I retain a lot of water, what happens to the water pressure in my blood, or my blood pressure?
Higher.
It increases. Okay, so people who have a really, really high salt diet suffer from high blood pressure. Okay, it can also be genetic. Genetically, your cells may retain water. Genetically, the diameter of your blood vessels may be small. Genetically, you might produce more adrenaline, have a higher metabolism. Emotionally, you might have a lot of negative emotional input that elevates adrenaline levels, which causes high blood pressure. So there's many different things that can cause high blood pressure. Okay, but why is it dangerous? Simple. Let's imagine that you take a garden hose and you screw it into the faucet. You put a squeeze handle on the end of the hose, but you close it, and then you turn the pressure on really high and just leave that hose. Will the hose be fine for a while?
Yeah.
Sure. But what happens after a week, a month, 6 months, a year of that hose being under high pressure all the time? What's going to happen to the walls of that hose?
It'll get thinner or damaged.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it'll get thinner, thinner, thinner until eventually what will that hose do? It'll burst. Okay? That's why high blood pressure is dangerous for your blood vessels. Okay? Because you have a lot of pressure on those walls and they get thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner, and then eventually that blood vessel bursts. Where that blood vessel bursts will then cause certain symptoms in you. That if it happens around your heart, that's an aneurysm, that's hemorrhaging. If it happens in your brain, that's an embolism or a stroke. So long-term high blood pressure causes blood vessels to burst, and if they burst in your heart or your brain, it will kill you. It's that simple, right? So the interesting thing about high blood pressure is, can you feel it?
Maybe.
No, you don't feel it at all. No, you can't sit here and go, whew, my blood pressure is higher today. you can't feel it. Okay. Someone can be fit and have great blood pressure. Someone can be fit and have terrible blood pressure. Someone can be unfit and have good or bad. Blood pressure is this highly variable and, in all honesty, unpredictable medical condition. So even though I'm reasonably fit, I have a family history of high blood pressure. My dad started taking high blood pressure meds when he was about 30, and took them for his almost his entire adult life. So I've been monitoring my blood pressure since my 20s, and I've been able to not take the medications because I exercise. So sometimes you can change your diet and not have to take high blood pressure meds. Sometimes you can control your blood pressure with exercise. Sometimes you can control your blood pressure by handling the negative emotional input that comes into your life. Okay, but high blood pressure is extremely common because people tend to not eat healthy, they tend to not exercise, and they tend to not process the emotional input very well. All three of those factors are totally contributors to high blood pressure, and over the long term, it'll get you. Okay, so you have to understand that while our culture is very much, oh, have a symptom, take a pill, have a problem, take a pill. You have to understand that all pharmaceuticals have side effects, all of them. Right? So I personally, I go to great lengths to not take pharmaceuticals. I would rather change my patterns of behavior to not take the pharmaceuticals, to not have to deal with the side effects. If you guys want to take a pill for it, go for it. I've spent enough time listening to Dawn and hearing about the side effects of all the pharmaceuticals. Don't get me wrong, pharmaceuticals are good if you need them. I'm of the opinion that if you don't have to take them and can avoid them, I would. That's my advice. I'm not teaching that. I'm not saying that's confirmed science. That's my interpretation of it. All right. So then we did blood pressure. So then after that, we need to talk about diameter. What do you think the diameter of veins are?
Large.
Sure. They have a larger diameter. That's one of the things that contributes to their lower pressure. Okay. They don't have a high rate of blood flow. They have a low rate of blood flow. Yep. Now, the one other thing that I want to add about the thin walls is these thin walls also allow for exchange. And you say exchange of what? There's some gas exchange here, and there's some nutrient exchange. Not a lot, but some. So when you draw a diagram, you have the heart. Here's the heart. Large blood vessel. Boom. Then the blood vessel kicks to be smaller. So you go like this. And then this, and then it gets bigger. Oops. I should use a valve. Nah, I won't get that specific. Get in there. Dun, dun. Who wants to come in? Somebody's knocking on their door. Who's coming in? Dun, dun. Didn't someone try to come in? Hmm?
I don't think so.
You didn't hear that? Did you hear a dun dun? No?
Said Monique left.
Okay. Must have missed him. Like this, and then back to the heart. Like such. So, the blood flow then, if it's flowing this way, so this large blood vessel here, this is an artery. Then as arteries get smaller, it goes into an arteriole. T-E-R-I-O-L-E. Arteriole. Then you get really, really thin blood vessels here. Really thin. Any idea what these thin blood vessels are?
Arteries.
Those are capillaries. And this is where your gas exchange really happens, a lot of it. And this is where you pick up, your cells pick up nutrients. And so this is nutrients out of the blood, and waste comes into the blood. Okay, you're familiar with these really, really thin capillaries. When can you see a capillary? It's really easy.
Wrist.
I'm sorry?
Wrist.
Ah, your wrist. Those are veins. Yep, those are all veins in your wrist. You ever look at your eyeball? You ever see the red lines in the it's called the conjunctivus, the white part of your eye?
Yep.
Right? Those are capillaries. Those little red lines, those are capillaries. Okay? Then the capillaries start to get bigger until it becomes a venule. And then it goes back to a vein, like such. And so these are the different blood vessels. So arteries and veins, yes.
Are our wrists veins or venules?
Depends on your anatomy. As you get close to, if you look at the wrist, let's see if I give you an example. My genetics are that my veins sit very, very close to the surface of my skin. I get it from my dad's side of the family. Let's go, I don't know, let's see if I can do this. Now let's take a look at Manro's wrist. Can you see that? Maybe the thin one there. Yeah, we can do this. Teach you an anatomy by using my hand. Let's do it. All right. There's a good wrist. So do you, where's a pen? Oh, let's use a red pen. Got to do it. Okay. So do you see this larger tube here and this larger tube there? Okay.
Yes.
That's a vein, right? But do you see that thin tube right in there? That's a venule. Okay. That's a venule right there. And that's a vein there. Do you see how the venule is a quarter the size of the vein? Right?
Yeah.
Yep. You go to the back of your hand, holy cow. I mean, there's, people, I've had to go to the doctor or be in the hospital, and they go for the IV, and they put the intravenous tube in the back of your hand, and the nurses get all excited because my veins sit really close to the skin. So that's just about, look at that big old baby. That's just about as big of a vein as you're going to get, a big old vein. Okay. So have any of you had a blood draw and they go into your elbow? They go in here, right? Yeah.
Yes.
What they're poking here is a vein. It's totally a vein. Okay. It's not an artery. If they were to poke an artery, the blood would come spraying out. It's always a vein. Ah, that's fun. I've never used that before. Hey, look at Mandarin's hand. That was awesome. All right. So we've talked about arteries, talked about veins. Now we need to talk about capillaries.
Wait, Mr. Emmanuel?
Yes.
I have a question. So, there's, a big
Like, can you show your hand again? Your
Sure. Do you want the back of the hand or the wrist?
the wrist.
The wrist. Okay.
There's like a big, like, I don't know what it is in the middle. Like, I feel like everybody has that. It's like really thick.
Are you
And,
looking
like,
at that right there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if I wiggle my fingers, do you see how? Kind of see? Do you see the motion there? Okay.
Yeah.
Those are actually the tendons that connect the muscles of your forearm to your fingers. Okay. We are really nothing more than puppets on a string, is what we really are. Okay. The muscles that move your fingers are down here in your arm. In fact, this and go with me on this. If you go like this, like hi, right? If you wave, you'll feel the muscles in your forearm contracting. Okay. As these muscles contract, they get shorter. When they get shorter, they pull on tendons and ligaments. Okay. And when they pull on the tendons, then the tendon is connected to this bone, and you literally move like a puppet. That's why when you move your fingers, you can feel the tendons and ligaments here, and you feel the muscles connecting here. These muscles move these fingers.
Okay.
Great. Now you guys are going to sit there and you're going to be like this, and you're not paying attention. Yeah. That's awesome. Anything else?
What question is this, Mr. Randall? Is this
This
still
is all 2B. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. And then we need to talk about capillaries. So let's hit capillaries. Capillaries are those really, really thin blood vessels where exchange happens. These are small and I mean very, very, very numerous. You have millions of capillaries in your body. Millions of them. Okay. Oh, what did I need to add for veins? Oh my gosh. What else do veins have?
The valve.
Valves, yes. The voice in the back of my head was yelling at me. I'm like, why are you yelling at me? I forgot about valves. So, extremely thin walls. Okay. Capillaries have just crazy thin walls. Why? Oxygen has to leave the blood. Macromolecules have to leave the blood. Carbon dioxide has to come into the blood. Metabolic waste like ammonia has to come into the blood. There's exchange here. Very, very, very thin walls. The blood also slows down. You can't have an exchange if the red blood cells go by very, very fast. And then moderate to low blood pressure. I need a picture. May I take this? May I take this? Yes. This is the end of 2. This is 2B. And
Yes.
then we need to do image. It's 42 something. Let me take a look. 4210. All right, so let's take a look at 4210. Blood vessels. So where do you want to start? I will start wherever you want.
The veins.
The veins, you got it. So let's start over here then. Well, actually, which one's the vein?
The blue heart.
The blue one. How do you know that's a vein?
Blood is flowing to the heart.
Yeah.
Okay, because blood is flowing back to the heart. Also because it has a
Blue arrow.
okay.
A valve.
We should talk about the color also. Has a valve. Okay. I also need to talk about the color of your blood. People say, "Oh, your blood is blue," and look, you can see in your wrist. See, your blood is blue. Okay, that is not the case. The blood in the veins in your wrist is blue because of the pigment in your skin. Right? Your blood is only going to be blue once. And do you know when your blood turns blue? It only turns blue once. When do you think that is?
When oxygen hits it.
When oxygen isn't present in your blood. And if oxygen isn't present in your blood, guess what you are? You're no longer with us. Okay? Your blood is only going to be blue once, and that's the day that you pass away. Okay? Your blood is never blue, ever, if you're alive. Okay? And people will say, all right, it's blue here, and then once they pull it out, and I should grab these from school. Once they pull blood out and it hits oxygen, then it turns red. That is also not the case. You ever had a blood draw and they use those little tubes that they connect to your vein? Have you had this experience?
Yeah.
Okay. Those tubes are called vacuotainers. And the reason why they're called vacuotainers is to prevent bacterial and fungal growth in those tubes. Guess what they do with all the air in the tube?
Suck it out.
They suck it out. That's why they're called vacuotainers, and that's how they keep the tubes sterile. There's no air in those tubes at all. Okay, so if your blood was blue until it hits air and then it turns red, if that were a true statement, then when they put those vacuotainers on your vein, what color blood would flow out of you?
Blue.
Blue. However, of course, it's not. When that blood flows out, what color is your blood? Always
Red.
red. Now, it's different shades of red, okay? So what has happened here is to help people understand oxygen rich, oxygen poor. The industry standard is red for oxygen rich and blue for oxygen poor. And then people see this blue-green color in our wrists and go, oh, see, there's the blue blood. And you go, uh-oh, we just taught a misconception. Your blood is only blue once, okay? And that's on the day that you pass away. Right. So we do use red and blue to symbolize oxygen rich and oxygen poor. Right. All right. So over here on the right hand side, let me get my pen to work here. There we go. The structure on the right is in fact a vein. You know it's a vein because of the valve in it. So this is a vein. Notice the blood flow here. This arrow is very subtle. Okay, blood is flowing here. This is thin, smooth muscle here. And it's important that we say it's smooth muscle because you don't have control of the smooth muscle in your body. Okay, you learn to control the smooth muscle at the base of your bladder and in your anus and your rectum when you're about a year and a half, 2, 3, depends on the person, fine. All right, but the overwhelming majority of the smooth muscle in your body, you don't control. You walk outside, it's bright, the smooth muscle of your iris based on the base of your brain closes down, right? You start to exercise and you need more blood flow. Base of the brain opens the veins up to allow more blood flow. It's not like you're exercising. You hold it. I have to open all my veins. Okay, that's not the way it works. The base of your brain does it automatically. And then, of course, since this is a vein, to prevent the fluid from accumulating, veins have valves, right, that prevent the reverse flow of blood due to gravity. Then you come back up here, and to the top of this image, you're of course going to add a heart because veins bring blood back to the heart. They then show you a cross section here. Know that what they're showing you here is a vein, And what they're showing you here is an artery. Of course, then I should have put that here. That's a little bent arrow, right? So the artery has a smaller diameter. Okay. Then blood flow here comes back in. So this is blood flow back to the heart. And this is blood flow away from the heart. There we go. Okay. Blood flow away from the heart, which makes this, of course, an artery with its smaller diameter. Notice here you had a thin layer of muscle, whereas here to reinforce the artery, you have a very thick layer of smooth muscle. And again, you do not control this muscle at all. It's controlled by the base of your brain automatically through your autonomic nerve system. Then blood flow happens this way. It can go to the lower part of the body, or we can go to a smaller structure here. As the artery gets smaller, what is this? As the artery gets smaller in diameter. It's an arteriole. Now, you will hear some people say arteriole. I'm not a fan of that. People can say that. It's arterial. You put the stress on the T, arterial. Right? Then from the arterioles, what is this bed here?
Capillary.
Yes, it's a capillary bed. As the blood vessels get smaller and smaller and smaller, okay? Then they show you a picture. This picture is super cool. Understand that this picture here, they're zooming in on a capillary bed. So when they zoom in on the capillary bed, what are these little red discs here?
The red blood cells.
Those are red blood cells, okay? Notice how the red blood cells line up single file inside of the capillaries. They line up like this. So the next time you're in the bathroom, you have access to a mirror, walk up to the mirror and take a good look at your eyeball, all right? And you will see the individual capillaries. Then I want you to visualize in those capillaries, I want you to visualize a little choo-choo train of red blood cells. Those red blood cells go single file inside of the capillaries, okay? So then how that works, you have the capillary, such, and then you have the red blood cells lining up single file, like such. So you have blood flow like this. And these are all red blood cells, okay? And then you have exchange. You have oxygen coming out of the blood. You have CO2 going into the blood. That's the whole point of the red blood cell is gas exchange. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are trading. Okay, and then in the fluid of the blood, you have nutrients, macromolecules coming out of the blood, while you have metabolic waste going into the blood. Okay, so the gases are handled by the red blood cells, while the waste and the macromolecules are in solution. All right, so now we leave the capillary bed. We now go to this structure here. As the capillaries start to get bigger, they form into a, what is that thing?
Venule?
Excellent, venule. And then the venule becomes larger and you're back into a vein. Just like that. Piece cake. Okay, so if I BX this, is this just a beautiful compare and contrast question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, totally and completely, right? Then that should take care of 2C, and then you get into 2D, and it says veins collect blood at low pressure, return it to the atria, and so then you should dig into image 42.6. Highlighter on this. Image 42.6 here. And this is going to be for question 2D. I printed this in color because that's how the oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor flowing of the blood works. However, if you're alive, is your blood ever blue?
No.
No.
No, please, please, please understand that. Okay. So, where do you want to start? I mean, this is a closed system, and it's a cycle, so it's just a big circle. So we can start anywhere. Where do you want to start?
Up left.
Top left
Atrium.
here.
Left atrium.
Oh, you want to start in the left atrium. Cool. All right. So that is there. So this would be, you want to start here in the left atrium, like such. I should make that black so that you can see it. I'm going to close that door. I'll be right back. All right, so we start in the left atrium. The left atrium contracts and the blood goes into the right atrium here. From the right atrium contracts, the blood leaves then through the aorta. So this is the aorta here. The aorta then splits into the ascending aorta and the descending aorta. Fine, let's go up. The ascending aorta then splits out into the carotid artery here, and the brachial artery that you actually can feel if you separate between your bicep and your tricep here. If you drive your finger in there, you can feel what's called the brachial artery, or the main artery in your arm. Then we get up into a capillary bed up in here, which is where you have your gas exchange, right? So in this area, you would have oxygen out and CO2 coming in. Make that bigger so you guys can see it. Zing, like such, right? The blood then now comes out of your arms, your upper chest, and your skull, right? It is now oxygen poor. That oxygen poor blood then returns. It should be the right ventricle. I should have labeled that. Really? Get in there. There we go, the right ventricle. Ah, that's right. Why is that incorrect? What should that be? In row?
The left.
Yes, should be the left. There we go. I'll fix that better later. All right, so then the blood then comes in here to the right atrium, to the right ventricle. The right ventricle contracts. The blood then leaves through the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery then splits to your left and right lung. You once again go into a capillary bed. However, the capillary bed, you still have gas exchange, but here the exchange is in a different direction. How is the exchange in your lungs different than the capillary beds in your somatic cells?
Carbon dioxide out.
Carbon dioxide out,
Oxygen in.
oxygen in. Same thing over here. CO2 out, O2 in, bang, just like that. Oxygen-rich blood now returns to the heart, and we go left atrium and left ventricle. To highlight that, or to white that out, it's going to be a drag. I might just write over that big. Let's go like this, left ventricle. There we go. I do know my left from my right, I promise. Now, the only thing that we then need to add to the bottom, it's the same process, simply when that aortic arch truncates or separates, you have your ascending aorta going up to your chest, arms, and head. You then have your descending aorta going down to your lower body and your lower extremities. However, the biology down here is the same. Capillary bed, gas exchange. Since this is somatic cells, you have O2 out of the blood and CO2 in. Like, boom, like that. 2D, very brief explanation. And if you have the chance to use color, great. If not, that's okay too. So that's arteries, veins, capillaries, venules, arterioles, gas exchange, nutrient flow. You okay? All right. Let's talk about your heartbeat. Because here's what's cool. Do we know what makes your heart actually beat? What causes the heartbeat? It's fascinating.
No.
Nope. We know the tissue that makes your heart beat, right? But how your heart actually is contracted, we know how it works, but we don't know what causes that tissue to function. It's fascinating. Okay, so there's a term that they're going to drop in core called myogenic. And these are contractions. That originate from within the heart muscle. Okay? Your brain can make your heart contract faster, but it is not your brain that makes your heart contract. It's a really important difference, okay? The base of your brain, the cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata can make your heart beat faster. But what actually makes your heart contract, what actually makes your heart beat, comes from a little piece of neural tissue about the size of the nail on your pinky. It's about that big. About that much neural tissue sits on the top left of your heart, and that's what actually makes your heart beat.
Mr. Manuel,
Yes.
did you skip 2C?
We hit 2C with 2B. So we hit 2C. You know what? I didn't list it. You are correct. We should have tagged 2C right there. You are spot on. Nicely done. Thank you.
And then
Yeah, I did just slide right from 2B into 2C and then 2D, didn't I? Yeah, 2C is covered right there. That's awesome. Thank you. Pardon?
2D, that's 2E. Where's 2D?
This is 2E.
2D was the image, right? That we just annotated, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so tag 2C on the end of 2B just when we talk about capillaries. And then 2D is only this image. Capillary beds and gas exchange with the person they've cut in half. And then 2E, we're going to talk about the heart contraction, your heartbeat. Cool?
Yes.
All right, thank you for catching that. I appreciate that very much. There's a little piece of neural tissue called the SA node. And what that stands for is your sinoatrial node. Whenever you have a bundle of nerve cells, it's referred to as a node. And what this sinoatrial node does, or the SA node, is it is the pacemaker. It establishes your heart beat, not your heart rate. There's a big difference between heartbeat and heart rate, okay? Heart rate goes up and down depending on your exercise level, okay? Heartbeat is boom, boom. That's a heartbeat, boom, boom. That's why if the SA node doesn't work and your heart stops, we call that cardiac arrest. That's what cardiac arrest is. Your heart stops, okay? And if you draw a basic heart, where the SA node sits is it's in the top left corner as as you look at the diagram, but it's actually, it sits in the top right corner of your heart, right about here. It's a little piece of tissue about the size of the nail. It's only about 5, 6, 7, 8 millimeters across. It's tiny, and it sits right there. Okay, so important. Now, what happens about once a second is this neural tissue depolarizes, which means that this neural tissue sends out an impulse about once a second. Impulse, boom, boom. Impulse, boom, boom. Impulse, boom, boom. What happens? No impulse.
No heartbeat.
No heartbeat. No impulse, no boom, boom. Your heart stops. Okay? So, depolarization of the SA node causes the atria to contract. It's not the whole heart. The SA node only controls the atria. And in science, when we don't know what causes something, what is our tell? When we don't know what actually causes it. Pardon?
Spontaneous.
Yes. The depolarization is spontaneous. Okay. If you guys ever cards with the same people over and over again, what you look for, what will make you good at cards, is you look for what's called a tell. Okay. Certain people have behavior when their hand is really good, and certain people have behavior when their hand is really bad. In cards, we call that a tell. Right? So science has a tell. Whenever we don't know exactly how something works and it just happens and we don't know why, we go, oh, that's spontaneous. All right? So no depolarization. We call that cardiac arrest. To arrest means to stop. Cardiac is your heart. And here's what we found. If your heart stops, we use what's called a defibrillator. There's 2 L's, isn't there? Yep. A defibrillator. Okay, you've seen this, hopefully not in person, but on the television. They yell, clear, and then and they zap the person. Have you seen this?
Yes.
Okay, now here's how electricity affects your muscles. Electricity makes muscle contract. Okay, so what we found is if someone's heart stops, we take a capacitor which holds a charge, and we take 2 metal paddles. Now they put KY jelly on the paddles so that the flow of electricity doesn't scorch the skin. Okay, so they put KY on one pad, and then you'll see them take the pads and they rub the pads together. Boom! Now we're lubricated. Now on TV, you will see them put the pads on the chest. Okay. In real life, that's not the way it works. Okay, but it's TV. In real life, what they do is they put one pad here and they put the other pad on the side of the rib cage here. Okay, and they do that so that way when the electricity flows between these 2 pads, it flows through the heart. Okay, on TV, they put it here. Okay, if they do it there, they would shock your sternum. Okay, and that's not going to do you any good. So they put it here and they put it on the other side of the heart, and then they run electricity through it. And what we found is if the SA node stops depolarizing, what we found is if you run electricity through it, sometimes the SA node will start contracting or start depolarizing again, and your heart will start contracting again. Okay, but do we understand why that works? No. So you see a medical doctor, right? KY jelly, take the pads, push them together, put it on there. I'll explain why they yell clear in a minute. Clear, boom. Then when they hit the person with the electricity, every muscle in their body contracts. That's why the whole body spasms. Every muscle in the body contracts. And then the doctors do some really high-tech science. What do?
Wait.
They wait.
Cross-checkers.
Yep, they wait. And if it doesn't work, they increase the capacity of the defibrillator again, put a little KY, clear, boom, and they hit them again. Okay, so we know this works. We really don't understand the science behind it. Okay, now, why do they yell clear?
Discovered. Like, how did I know that?
In the early 1900s, and how they figured they knew that electricity stops heart rate. The first, because if your SA node is functioning properly and you run electricity through it, your SA node turns off. That's called electrocution. Okay. And so the first person, I don't know the history, who was the first person that went, hold it. If electricity will turn the heart off, can electricity turn the heart back on? I don't know who first discovered that. That's a really cool history question, right? Now, here's the clear. Someone has had medical trauma. They've had a very serious medical event, and I'm touching them physically, right, skin to skin, and they run electricity through that patient. What's going to then come through their skin and come through me?
Electricity.
Electricity. And I'm probably touching them with both hands, right? So I'm touching them with both hands. The electricity comes through one hand. Guess what? Goes across my SA node and then comes out my other hand. If my SA node is depolarizing normally and I run electricity through it, what will happen to my SA node?
Stop.
It'll stop. Okay. So I'm working on the patient, and whoever's run the defibrillator yells clear. What does that mean? It means I let go of the patient. Clear out of the way. And then boom, they hit the patient, and then I go back to work. That's why they yell clear. Because if they don't yell clear, they will electrocute any of the other medical staff that's touching the person. Pretty cool. Okay, so I think that's a nice place to stop, because then we're going to go from the SA node to the AV node and talk about the rest of heart contraction tomorrow. Don't forget, today's Thursday, so don't forget that tomorrow by 3, you want to post the names of the alumni that you're going to contact, and then I will send you their contact information over the weekend. And don't forget about Core 5 on Tuesday. That exam's going to take you a while. That's a highly detailed, long exam.